They said he held up a tree trunk for 3 days and 3 nights, not a branch. A full tree trunk. Why? To prove to his people that he was worthy to lead them. To show the Mapuche that he had the strength not just of muscle, but of spirit. Because they were fighting for more than land. They were fighting for survival. And Caupolicán, the warrior chosen as Toki, their supreme war leader, stood at the very center of it all. But his story isn't just about heroics or epic battles. It's about resistance. It's about what it means to lead your people when everything is at stake. And it's about what happens when an empire underestimates the fire in the hearts of the people it tries to crush. Before the Spanish ever set foot in Chile, the Mapuche thrived in the valleys, mountains, and forests of the south. They weren't a kingdom or an empire in the European sense. They were free, decentralized, organized into smaller kinship-based communities that made decisions through councils. But when news came that strange men had arrived from the sea, with weapons that spit fire and beasts of war that thundered across the land, everything changed. The Spaniards were led by Pedro de Valdivia, a conquistador dreaming of gold, glory, and conquest. He had already established Santiago and began pushing southward. But in Mapuche territory, he was stepping into a world he did not understand. Caupolicán wasn't born into royalty. He wasn't handed power. He earned it. When it came time for the Mapuche to choose their new Toki, military leader, it wasn't just about speeches or promises. It was about proving you had the strength to bear the weight of war. Literally. The elders placed a massive tree trunk on Caupolicán's shoulders. He held it not for hours, but for days. As the sun rose and fell, as his legs trembled and his breath slowed, he stood there, unmoving, unbroken. The message was clear. If he could carry a tree for 3 days, he could carry the burden of leadership through fire and blood. With his appointment as Toki, Caupolicán joined forces with another legendary Mapuche figure, Lautaro. Lautaro had once been a captive of the Spanish and had learned their tactics before escaping and turning that knowledge against them. Together, they became a nightmare for the Spanish invaders. They knew the forests, the rivers, the rhythms of the land. And they used that knowledge with brutal efficiency. They launched ambushes, destroyed forts, and turned terrain into a weapon. This wasn't a war of empires. It was a war of defiance, one in which the Mapuche showed the world that they would not be tamed. Under Caupolicán's command, the Mapuche launched a fierce campaign to drive the Spanish out. They attacked forts like Tucapel and Purén, dismantling the illusion that European armor and steel made them invincible. Spanish horses fell in the mud. Muskets misfired in the rain. And the Mapuche warriors, armed with spears, slings, and courage, kept pushing forward. But with every victory came retaliation. The Spanish were not easily dissuaded. They returned with reinforcements, rebuilding what had been destroyed. The cycle of fire and rebuilding became a grim rhythm. What made Caupolicán so powerful wasn't just his strength or tactical mind, it was his unshakable belief that his people deserved to live free. He understood that this war was not just about holding territory. It was about memory, culture, and dignity. Every village they defended, every ambush they launched, was a declaration, "We are not yours to conquer." But as the war dragged on, so did the losses. Allies fell, resources dwindled. Lautaro, his comrade and brother-in-arms, was eventually killed in battle. The loss was devastating, but Caupolicán refused to surrender. Eventually, the Spanish captured Caupolicán through betrayal. It wasn't on the battlefield where he fell, but through a trap. A Mapuche informant, perhaps under duress or seeking favor, revealed his location. The Spanish captured him and marched him back to their stronghold in Cañete. There, the man who had once held up a tree to prove his worth was now bound and paraded before his enemies. Valdivia was gone by then. He had died at the hands of the Mapuche. But the Spanish still wanted a message to be sent. They didn't just want to kill Caupolicán. They wanted to humiliate him. They forced him to watch as his son was murdered before his eyes. And then they carried out his execution. Impalement. A cruel, torturous death meant to break not just the body, but the spirit. But Caupolicán never begged, never cried, never gave them the satisfaction of seeing him reduced to anything less than what he was. A warrior, a symbol, a flame that would never be extinguished, because even in death, his legacy became legend. The Mapuche resistance didn't end with Caupolicán. It continued for centuries. In fact, the Mapuche were one of the few indigenous peoples in the Americas to remain independent long after most others had been colonized. They signed treaties, held their ground, and maintained cultural continuity despite the waves of colonization that tried to erase them. And today, Caupolicán remains a symbol of that enduring resistance. Statues stand in his honor. His name echoes in poetry and protest. He is not just remembered, he is revered. What Caupolicán teaches us is that leadership isn't inherited, it's earned. It's forged in moments of pain, struggle, and impossible odds. He reminds us that true power isn't about domination, it's about sacrifice, about being willing to carry a weight so heavy that most would crumble, just to protect the people who are counting on you. It's about standing tall, even when the world is trying to cut you down. The Spanish came with guns, horses, and dreams of gold. But what they found was something they couldn't conquer with steel, an unbreakable spirit. A people who knew their land, their stories, their worth. And a leader who proved, with every breath, that freedom is not a gift. It is a fight that never truly ends. So when you hear the name Caupolicán, don't just think of the man who held up a tree. Think of the thousands who stood with him. The forests that whispered their defiance. The battles that shook the mountains. Think of the legacy that still lives today. In every Mapuche protest, in every reclaimed word, in every voice that says, "We are still here." Because resistance is not a moment, it's a movement, and Caupolicán was its heart.